The aliens found a human fleet beyond the galaxy. Every ship was watching them. The scout ship Velen Drift moved slowly through the black space at the edge of the galaxy. Out here, the stars were few and far apart. There was no light from any sun, no warmth, no sound. Only cold darkness stretched in every direction. The crew of the Velen Drift belonged to the Charnaki, a species of tall, thin beings with gray skin and large black eyes. They had been sent to map the empty region beyond the galaxy's edge, a place their people called the Silent Reach. Captain Voss Terrell stood on the bridge, watching the main screen. He had led many missions before, but none like this one. The Silent Reach was not truly empty. Old records from long-dead civilizations spoke of strange signals coming from this direction. Signals that never repeated and never made sense. Most scientists believed the signals were just noise from dying stars. Voss was not so sure. "Report," Voss said to his sensor officer, a young Charnaki named Pren. "Nothing new, Captain," Pren said. "Empty space. No planets, no debris fields, no gas clouds. It is strange how clean this area is." Voss nodded slowly. Clean space was rare. Space was usually full of dust, rocks, and small pieces of broken worlds. An area this empty felt wrong, like someone had swept it clean on purpose. The ship continued forward for 3 more days. The crew fell into a routine of quiet watching and waiting. Then, on the 4th day, everything changed. "Captain, I am getting something," Pren said, his voice tight with excitement. "A large mass, dead ahead. It is metal. Lots of metal." Voss walked closer to the sensor station. "How large?" Pren's fingers moved fast over his controls. His black eyes grew wide. "Captain, I am reading hundreds of objects, maybe thousands, all metal, all in a fixed formation. This is not a natural object. This is..." He paused, unsure of the word. "This is a fleet." The bridge went silent. Everyone turned to look at the screen. A cluster of dots appeared, spread out in a pattern too neat to be random. Ships. Many, many ships, floating together in the dark, far from any star, far from any world, far from anything at all. Voss felt his pulse quicken. In all his years of service, he had explored dead moons, drifting asteroid fields, and the burned-out remains of long-collapsed stars. He had seen wreckage from old wars and the quiet ruins of civilizations that had faded away long before the Charnaki ever left their homeworld. But he had never seen anything organized like this, sitting so far from any world that could have built it. "Bring up a wider scan," he said. "I want to see the full shape of this formation." The screen zoomed out, and the pattern became clearer. The ships were arranged in long, curving rows, layered one behind another like the petals of some enormous flower made of metal and shadow. At the center of the formation sat a cluster of larger vessels, surrounded by rings of smaller ships spreading outward in every direction. "It's beautiful, in a strange way," Dahlia said quietly, almost to herself. "It's deliberate," Voss said. "Someone designed this. Someone placed every one of these ships exactly where they wanted it. This isn't wreckage. This is a formation, held in place for who knows how long." "Slow our approach," Voss ordered. "Quarter speed. I want full scans before we get any closer. And someone wake the rest of the science team. They're going to want to see this." Within minutes, the bridge filled with more crew members, drawn from their quarters by the news spreading fast through the ship. Even off-duty officers crowded near the entrance, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the screen. Voss allowed it. A discovery like this deserved to be witnessed, not hidden away in a single report read later by only a few. The Velen Drift crept forward. As it did, the shapes on the screen became clearer. They were indeed ships, but unlike anything the Charnaki had built. They were long and sharp, built with hard edges, instead of the smooth curves that Charnaki ships used. Some were small, like fighters. Others were massive, larger than any warship the Charnaki fleet had ever built. There were carriers, cruisers, and strange rounded shapes that might have been supply ships or transports. The whole group sat together in space, unmoving, silent, like a graveyard of the stars. "No engine activity," Pren reported. "No power readings. No heat signatures beyond background temperature. Captain, these ships appear to be completely dead." "How many?" Voss asked. Pren checked again. 1,206 ships, Captain. All in formation. All facing the same direction. Facing which direction? Pren looked up from his console, and for the first time, his voice shook a little. Facing us, Captain. Every single one. Voss felt a chill run through his body, even though the bridge was warm. A dead fleet should not be facing anything. A dead fleet should be drifting, turned in random directions by the last forces that acted on it. But this fleet was ordered. It was arranged. And it was pointed, like 1,000 silent eyes, straight at the approaching Charnaki ship. Could this be a natural alignment? Asked Second Officer Dahlia, a calm and careful woman who rarely spoke unless she had something important to say. Perhaps whatever destroyed these ships pushed them all the same way. Unlikely, Pren said. The formation is too perfect. Every ship holds an exact position relative to the others. This is not drift. This is design. Voss rubbed his chin, thinking. Send a message. Standard first contact protocol. All channels. All frequencies. If anyone is alive out there, they should hear us. The message went out, repeating across every channel the Charnaki knew. Minutes passed. No answer came back. Try again, Voss said. Wider range this time. Still nothing. The great fleet sat in silence, unmoving, unanswering. Let's get a visual, Voss said. Bring us closer, but keep defense shields at full strength. I don't like this. The Velen drift moved in until the nearest ship filled the main screen. It was a massive vessel, long and gray, with strange markings along its hull that none of the Charnaki could read. The metal looked worn but not damaged. There were no signs of battle, no holes from weapons, no scorch marks from explosions. The ship simply sat there, whole and quiet, like it was sleeping rather than destroyed. I'm reading writing on the hull, Pren said. He zoomed the camera in closer. Strange symbols appeared, arranged in neat rows. None of the translation systems on the Velen drift could understand them. Let the linguistics team look at it, Voss said. In the meantime, keep scanning. I want to know everything about this fleet before we decide what to do next. The scans continued through the day. The Charnaki learned that the ships were built from an alloy they did not recognize, stronger than anything in their own shipyards. The design of the vessels suggested advanced weapon systems, though none of them appeared to be active. Life support systems inside the ships showed no readings at all, meaning either there was no life inside, or the systems had been shut down completely. Every hour, Voss requested a new update from his crew, and every hour, the picture grew a little stranger. The engineers reported that the metal of the hulls showed almost no signs of wear from micrometeorite impacts, despite what should have been thousands of years of exposure to open space. Somehow, the ships had either been repaired constantly, or they had been built to withstand far more than any Charnaki vessel could. The weapons officer noted that the shapes built into the hulls, long tubes and wide panels, matched patterns associated with heavy energy weapons, though none of the systems showed any active charge. If these ships are dead, the weapons officer said during one report, then whoever built them expected to fight something big. These aren't small patrol craft. Even the smallest ships in that formation could go toe-to-toe with our heaviest cruiser. Voss absorbed each report carefully, building a picture in his mind of a species that valued strength, precision, and order above all else. It did not comfort him. A species capable of building a fleet this large, this well-protected, and leaving it untouched for so long in the empty dark, was not a species to be taken lightly, whether they were still alive or long gone. My best guess, said the ship's science officer, an older Charnaki named Eber, is that this is an abandoned fleet. Perhaps its makers left this region long ago, or perhaps they were wiped out by some disaster we cannot detect. The ships have simply been drifting here since. Then why are they all facing us? Dahlia asked again. Drifting ships turn many directions over time. These have not moved even slightly since we first detected them. Eber had no answer for that. Voss made his decision. We will send a probe to one of the smaller ships. No live boarding yet. I want data first. A small probe launched from the Valoon drift, its thrusters glowing faintly as it crossed the gap between the two fleets. The bridge crew watched in tense silence as the probe approached one of the smaller vessels, a fighter-sized craft, near the edge of the formation. Probe is approaching the hull, Pren said. Beginning scan. The screen showed the probe's camera feed. Up close, the ship's surface was smooth but marked by tiny scratches, as if it had traveled through space for a very long time. There was a symbol near what looked like an entry hatch, a shape like a circle with lines crossing through it. "Probe reports a sealed hatch," Pren said. No response to standard signals, attempting a closer scan of the interior through the hull. The scan took several minutes. Slowly, an image began to form on the screen, a rough outline of the interior structure. Rows of what looked like seats, a cockpit area. And then, something that made everyone on the bridge go still. "Life form detected," Pren said, his voice barely above a whisper. "One life form. Inside the ship." "Alive?" Voss asked sharply. Pren checked his readings again and again. "The scan says, yes. Faint signs of biological activity. Very faint, but alive." The bridge erupted into quiet, urgent conversation. A ship that showed no power for over 1,000 vessels, yet somehow held a living being inside. It made no sense. "Bring the probe back," Voss ordered. "Do not attempt contact. I want the science team to review this data immediately." As the probe turned to return to the Valoon drift, something happened that no one expected. A single light appeared on the hull of the small ship, a soft blue glow near the top, like an eye opening in the darkness. "Captain," Pren shouted, "that ship just activated a sensor array." "Which ship?" "The one we scanned. It's awake." Voss stared at the screen as the small blue light grew brighter. Then, one by one, other lights began to appear across the great fleet. First a handful, then dozens, then hundreds, spreading through the formation like a wave moving across still water. Every ship, every single one of the 1,000 vessels, began to light up with the same soft blue glow. "Report on all detected power signatures," Voss ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Captain, all 1,206 ships are now showing active power readings," Pren said, his hands shaking slightly over the controls. "Energy levels are rising across the entire fleet." "Are they preparing to attack?" Dahlia asked. "I don't think so," Eber said, studying his own readings. "The energy signatures do not match weapon charging patterns. This looks more like systems booting up. Like the whole fleet was in some kind of sleep mode, and something just woke it up." "What woke it up?" Voss asked. No one had an answer. But Voss had a feeling he already knew. It was their probe, their scan. The moment they had reached out and touched that small ship, they had triggered something across the entire fleet, something that had been waiting, patient and silent, for a very long time. "Pull us back," Voss said. "Full reverse, now." The Valoon drift began to retreat, but the massive fleet did not move to chase them. It simply sat there, glowing with soft blue light, every single ship now fully powered, and every single sensor array turned directly at the retreating Charnaki scout ship. It felt less like a fleet preparing for battle, and more like a fleet that had simply opened its eyes and was now watching, carefully, silently, the small ship that had dared to come close. "Captain," Pren said quietly, staring at the screen, "I'm picking up something else, a signal, very weak. It's coming from the center of the formation." "Put it through," Voss said. The bridge filled with static for a moment. Then, through the noise, came a sound none of them had heard before. A voice. Low, calm, and strangely gentle, speaking words in a language the ship's computer could not translate. It repeated the same short message 3 times, then fell silent again. "What did it say?" Dahlia asked. "I don't know," Voss admitted, staring at the massive fleet on the screen, every ship now glowing, every sensor now aimed at them. "But I think we just found something we were never meant to find." The Valoon drift continued its retreat, carrying with it the recording of that strange voice, and the image of 1,000 ships waking from a long sleep, all watching, all silent, all waiting for whatever would come next. Behind them, the fleet remained still, lit by soft blue light, patient as it had been for who knew how many years, now finally aware that someone had come looking. And far away, deep within Charnaki space, word of the discovery was about to spread, setting into motion events that no one, not the Charnaki, and not even the sleeping fleet itself, could yet imagine. Voss sat back in his command chair, staring at the screen long after the fleet had disappeared into the darkness behind them. Something about that voice stayed with him, a calm, steady sound that did not belong to a dead and empty fleet. It belonged to something that was still very much alive, waiting somewhere far beyond what his sensors could reach. He knew, with a certainty he could not explain, that this was only the beginning. Later that evening, once the ship had settled into a steady course back toward Charnaki space, Voss called Iber and Dahlia to his quarters. The three of them sat around a small table, replaying the recording of the strange voice again and again, trying to catch any detail they might have missed the first time. "We need to send this to the linguistics division the moment we're back in range," Iber said. "If we can even partially translate that message, it could tell us who built that fleet and why." "And if the fleet really did wake up because of us," Dahlia added, "then somewhere out there, someone already knows we found it. We may not have much time before they come looking for answers of their own." Voss nodded slowly, staring at the small device on the table as it played the calm, steady voice once more. He thought about the soft blue lights spreading across 1,000 ships in perfect unison, about the strange writing on the hulls, and about the deep, patient stillness of a fleet that had waited, undisturbed, for who knew how long. Whatever they had found out there in the silent reach, he was certain of one thing: the galaxy had just become a much bigger and much more uncertain place than any of them had believed the day before. He did not sleep well that night, and he suspected none of his crew did either. Somewhere behind them, in the endless dark beyond the galaxy's edge, 1,000 ships glowed softly, watching, recording, and waiting. The news of the sleeping fleet spread fast through Charnaki space. Within 2 weeks, Captain Voss Terrell found himself standing before the High Council of the Charnaki Dominion, a group of elder leaders who ruled over hundreds of star systems. They sat in a large circular room, their gray faces lit by soft white light, all eyes fixed on the report displayed above them. "You are certain of these numbers?" asked Councillor Marin, the oldest member of the council. 1,206 ships, all activating at once?" "Yes, Councillor," Voss said, "and that number may not represent the whole fleet. We only scanned the ships we could see. There may be more hidden further out, or ships too far away for our sensors to detect." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. A fleet of that size was larger than the entire Charnaki Navy. If it belonged to a hostile power, it could pose a serious threat. But if it was truly abandoned, as some believed, it could also be a great opportunity. Ancient technology, powerful and unknown, was sitting out there in the dark, waiting to be claimed. "What do we know about the builders of this fleet?" asked Councillor Yeska, a sharp-eyed woman known for her caution. "Very little," Voss admitted. "The writing on the hulls does not match anything in our records. The ship designs are unlike our own, or any species we have encountered before. But the voice message we recorded may give us more information. Our linguists have been studying it." "And?" Marin asked. Voss nodded to the science officer beside him, an older Charnaki named Iber, who stepped forward with a small device in his hand. "We were able to translate part of the message," Iber said. "It took time, because the language uses patterns we had never seen. But we found a partial match in an old archive, records left by a trading species that vanished many centuries ago. They once had contact with a species from a distant part of the galaxy. A species they called, in their old records, the humans. The name meant nothing to most of the council, but a few of the older members straightened in their seats, exchanging quiet glances that told Voss this was not entirely new information to everyone in the room. "I have heard that name before," Marin said slowly. "In old warnings passed down from the first explorers of our people, a species said to be small in number, but fierce beyond reason. Most believed it to be myth, a story told to frighten young pilots into caution. The message we recorded," Iber continued, "translates roughly to this: this fleet stands as a guard. Approach only if you carry no harm. We believe it may be some form of automated warning, left behind by whoever built these ships." The council fell into a heavy silence. A warning meant purpose. A warning meant someone had built this fleet for a reason, and that reason was still active, even if its builders were long gone or far away. "What is your recommendation, Captain?" Marin finally asked. Voss thought carefully before answering. "I recommend caution, but also further investigation. If this fleet belongs to a species called humans, and if that species built something this large and this well protected, we need to understand what they are and where they have gone. Ignoring this discovery would be foolish." but approaching it carelessly could be dangerous. Before Voss and Iber were dismissed, Counselor Jeska raised her hand once more. "One more matter, Captain. You said the fleet activated the moment your probe touched the small ship. Do you believe that was a coincidence, or a deliberate trigger?" "I believe it was deliberate," Voss said. "The activation spread too quickly, too evenly, across the entire formation. It was not a random system failure. It was a response, as if the fleet was designed to notice exactly that kind of contact and react to it immediately." "And the voice message," Jeska pressed. "Do you believe it was meant as a threat or a warning?" Voss considered the question carefully. "I believe it was a statement of fact, Counselor. Not an emotional threat, and not a plea. Simply information, delivered calmly, the way you might read out the rules of a place before someone enters it." Jeska studied him for a long moment, then nodded and sat back, apparently satisfied for now. The council debated for hours after Voss and Iber were dismissed. In the end, a new mission was approved. A larger ship, the science cruiser Halvan Rest, would be sent to the fleet with a full team of scientists, linguists, and a security detachment. Voss would lead the mission again, since he had already made first contact and understood the situation better than anyone else. The 3 weeks of preparation before departure were busy ones. Voss spent much of his time reviewing candidate crew members for the mission, choosing officers not just for their skill, but for their steady temperament. He wanted people who would remain calm in the face of the unknown, not the kind who might panic and make a rash decision under pressure. Iber, meanwhile, worked closely with the ship's linguistics team, feeding them every scrap of translated data recovered from the first mission, hoping to build a stronger foundation for communication before they arrived. Counselor Marin visited the shipyard personally on the day before departure, a rare gesture for someone of his rank. He found Voss on the observation deck of the Halvan Rest, looking out over the busy dockyard where the ship was completing its final preparations. "You understand the weight of this mission, Captain," Marin said, standing beside him. "I do, Counselor," Voss replied. "More than I did the first time." "Good," Marin said, "because whatever you find out there, whatever you learn about this species called humans, it may shape how our people are seen and treated for generations to come. Choose your steps carefully." "I intend to, Counselor," Voss said, and he meant it. 3 weeks later, the Halvan Rest arrived at the edge of the Silent Reach. It was a much larger vessel than the Velen Drift, built for long research missions, with laboratories, translation systems, and a small fleet of defense drones. As they approached the coordinates of the sleeping fleet, Voss stood on the bridge once more, watching the darkness ahead. "Report," he said to the new sensor officer, a woman named Talus. "I'm picking up the fleet now, Captain," Talus said. "Same formation as before. Same position. All ships still show active power readings, though lower than when we last saw them light up. Any change in behavior?" "None so far. They appear to be waiting." As the Halvan Rest drew closer, the great fleet came into view once more, rows upon rows of dark, sharp-edged ships, glowing faintly with the same soft blue light from before. It was an impressive and unsettling sight, made even more so by the knowledge that every ship in that formation might still be watching them. Many of the crew aboard the Halvan Rest had never seen the fleet before, and their reactions matched the ones Voss remembered from his first crew weeks earlier. Officers stopped what they were doing to stare at the main screen. Whispered conversations spread through the corridors during shift changes. Some of the younger crew members admitted, quietly and half-joking, that they had trouble sleeping the night before arriving, their minds full of stories about ghost fleets and ancient warnings passed down since childhood. Iber spent the final hours before arrival, preparing his translation equipment, cross-referencing every scrap of data from the first mission with older Charnaki archives, searching for any further mention of the name human in old records, trade logs, or half-forgotten legends. He found only fragments, a handful of vague references from long-dead trading species, none of them detailed enough to be useful, all of them carrying the same undertone of caution, as if whoever had written them had chosen their words carefully, unwilling to say too much about a species they clearly respected or feared. "Send the standard greeting message again, along with our translated attempt at communication," Voss ordered. The message went out. This time, after only a short delay, a response came back. Not words, but a simple pattern of light, one of the ships near the center of the formation blinking twice, then holding steady. "They acknowledged us," Talus said, surprised. "Captain, I think that means they want us to proceed." Voss considered this carefully. "Prepare a boarding team. Small group, light weapons, full recording equipment. We'll take a shuttle to the ship that blinked. If it wants us to come closer, we'll go see what it has to say." An hour later, Voss stood in a small shuttle bay with Iber, Talus, and 4 security officers, all dressed in protective suits in case the alien ship's atmosphere was unsafe. The shuttle launched smoothly, crossing the gap between the 2 fleets under the watchful glow of 1,000 alien eyes. As they approached the ship that had signaled them, its hatch slid open on its own, revealing a dark opening, lit only by a faint blue light deep inside. There was no resistance, no defense, just an open door waiting for them. "This feels like a trap," one of the security officers muttered. "Maybe," Voss said, "but if they wanted to destroy us, they've had plenty of chances already. Let's proceed carefully." The team floated through the airlock and into the ship's interior. Inside, the corridors were narrow but well built, made from the same strong metal as the hull. The walls were lined with strange markings and small lights that flickered on as the team passed, as if the ship itself was leading them somewhere. They followed the lights through several corridors, until they reached a larger chamber, filled with rows of what looked like control stations, all dark and silent except for one, near the center of the room, which glowed with a soft screen full of moving symbols. "This looks like the command center," Eber said, moving closer to examine the glowing station. "Captain, I believe this is meant for us to interact with." Voss approached slowly, watching for any sign of danger. Nothing happened. The screen simply continued to display its symbols, slowly shifting and changing. "Try connecting our translation device," Voss said. Iber attached a small device to the edge of the console. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the symbols on the screen changed, rearranging themselves into a new pattern, and the translation device began to hum softly as it worked. Words began to appear on Iber's handheld screen, slow and uncertain at first, then more steady, as the device adapted to the alien language. "I have a rough translation," Iber said, his voice tight with excitement. "It says, 'This vessel is part of the Sentinel Array, left in place by the order of the United Human Fleet Command. Its purpose is to observe and record all who pass through this region. If you are reading this, you are the first visitors in a very long time.'" The team stood in stunned silence. A Sentinel Array, left on purpose, built to watch. "Ask it how long it has been here," Voss said. Iber typed the question into the translation device and waited. The response came slowly, the screen flashing new symbols. "It says the fleet has been stationed here for, the number is very large. If I am reading this correctly, it says over 11,000 years. No one spoke. 11,000 years was longer than the entire recorded history of the Charnaki Dominion. A fleet that old, still active, still watching, was almost impossible to imagine. "Ask why it was left here," Voss said. "What is it guarding?" Another pause. Then the answer came. "It says the fleet marks the boundary of human territory," Eber translated. "It says beyond this point lies space, claimed and protected by humanity. It says the fleet exists to warn travelers, to record their presence, and to alert human forces if the boundary is crossed with hostile intent." Talus stepped forward, looking pale. "Captain, if this fleet has been recording every visitor for 11,000 years, and it's connected to some kind of alert system, then whoever built it may already know we are here." Voss felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He thought of the voice they had heard on the first mission, calm and steady, speaking words meant not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. "This fleet stands as a guard. Approach only if you carry no harm." "Ask it one more question," Voss said quietly. "Ask if the alert has already been sent." Iber's hands trembled slightly as he typed the question. The response appeared almost instantly this time, as if the ship had been waiting for exactly this question. "It says yes," Iber read aloud. "It says the alert was sent the moment our probe first touched the small fighter ship, 3 weeks ago. It says a response fleet has already been dispatched, and it will arrive, soon." The chamber fell into complete silence. Somewhere far beyond the edge of the galaxy, deep within space that belonged to a species called humans, a fleet was already on its way, called forth by a single automated warning system that had done exactly what it was built to do for 11,000 years. Watch, wait, and report. Voss looked around at his team, then back at the glowing screen. Get everything you can from this ship, he said. Records, history, anything about this human fleet that's coming. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with, and we don't have much time left to find out. As the team worked, the ship around them continued to hum softly, its lights steady and calm, as if it had simply been waiting all this time for someone, anyone, to finally ask the right questions. Iber pulled record after record from the ship's memory banks, copying everything onto the Halvan Rest's own systems for closer study later. Some files were simple logs, listing the date of the Sentinel fleet's construction, and the names of the human officers who had once commanded it, names that meant nothing to the Charnaki, but that Iber recorded carefully all the same, treating them with a strange kind of respect. Other files were more difficult to translate, filled with technical diagrams and strategic notes that the translation device could only partially interpret. One file, near the end of their search, caught Voss's attention. It was shorter than the others, almost like a personal message rather than an official record. The translation came through slowly, the device struggling with what appeared to be more casual, less formal language than the rest of the archive. It says, Iber read carefully, "To whoever finds this fleet awake after so long, know that we do not build to conquer, only to protect what we have rebuilt with great cost. Approach with honesty, and you will find no enemy here." It's signed with a name, Fleet Commander Ayana Reyes, dated to the year the Sentinel line was completed. Voss read the words again on his own handheld screen, feeling an unexpected weight settle over him. It was not the message of a conqueror, nor the cold warning of an automated defense system. It read like something written by a person who had lived through terrible loss and wanted, quite simply, for it never to happen again, to anyone, if it could be avoided. "Copy everything," Voss said quietly. "Every file, every record. The Council needs to see all of this, not just the parts that sound dangerous." Outside, in the vast darkness of the silent reach, the rest of the Great Fleet remained still and silent, watching, recording, and waiting for whatever would come next. Back aboard the Halvan Rest, the mood had turned tense. Word of the living presence detected inside the small ship had already spread through the crew, and with it came a mixture of excitement and fear that Voss could feel in the air as he walked the corridors back to the briefing room. Some crew members whispered eagerly about the possibility of true first contact with a living human. Others kept their distance from the science labs, unsettled by the idea of a fleet that had somehow kept a person alive, in some form, for over 1,000 years. Voss stood in the briefing room with his senior officers, watching a recording of everything they had learned from the Sentinel ship. The room was quiet, except for the low hum of the ship's systems and the soft voice of Iber, summarizing the records they had pulled from the ancient console. The Sentinel array was built at the end of what the records call the Long Wars, Iber explained, standing beside a large screen filled with translated text and images. From what we can understand, the humans fought a series of terrible conflicts, both among themselves and against other species, long before our own civilization began recording history. After those wars ended, the Human Fleet Command built this line of Sentinel ships to mark the border of their space and to prevent any future conflict from starting by accident. "So this is a warning system," Counselor Marin said through the communication screen, joining the briefing remotely from Charnaki space. "Nothing more." "That is what the records suggest," Iber said. "But there is more. The Sentinel ship also contained combat logs, describing battles the humans fought long ago. Counselor, some of these battles were fought against fleets far larger than our own, and the human forces won every single one, often while outnumbered." A murmur passed through the room. Voss studied the images on the screen, showing human ships in combat, moving with a speed and precision that seemed almost impossible. He had seen many types of warships in his career, from many different species, but nothing quite like this. One recording in particular held his attention, a grainy sequence showing a small group of human ships facing down a much larger enemy formation. The human vessels moved in tight, coordinated patterns, breaking apart and reforming faster than Voss could track, striking weak points in the enemy line before retreating just as quickly. By the end of the recording, the larger enemy fleet had been reduced to scattered wreckage, while the human ships, though damaged, remained largely intact. This engagement is dated to what the records call the third contraction, Eber explained. According to the notes, the human fleet was outnumbered nearly 4-1. They won in under 2 hours. 4-1, Tallis repeated quietly, staring at the screen. And they still won that quickly? According to these records, yes, Eber said. Though I should note, the records also describe heavy losses in earlier engagements during the same war. Whatever gave them the advantage in this battle, it came at a cost, learned through terrible experience elsewhere. What kind of weapons do they use? Asked Tallis. Advanced energy weapons, similar to our own but far more powerful, Eber said. But it isn't just their technology that stands out, it's their tactics. The records describe human commanders making decisions in seconds that would take our own strategists hours to plan. And there are notes about something the humans call adaptability. They seem to change their strategies mid-battle, faster than any enemy could predict. You said a response fleet has already been sent, Marin said. How much time do we have before it arrives? Voss checked the data pulled from the Sentinel ship. The records estimate travel time based on standard patrol speeds. If the alert triggered 3 weeks ago as the ship told us, the response fleet could arrive within the next several days, perhaps less. The council fell silent for a long moment. Then Marin spoke again, his voice heavy with concern. The council has decided to send additional forces to your position, Captain. As a precaution, 3 warships from our 3rd Fleet are being dispatched to support the Halvan Rest. They should arrive before the human fleet does. Voss did not like the sound of that. Counselor, with respect, sending warships to this region could be seen as a hostile act. If the humans believe we are preparing for conflict, it could make the situation worse, not better. We cannot leave a research vessel undefended in a region we know so little about, Marin said firmly. The decision has already been made. The warships are on their way. The call ended, leaving Voss standing in the briefing room with a growing sense of unease. He looked at Iber and Tallis, both of whom shared his concern. This is a mistake, Tallis said quietly. If the humans are as capable as these records suggest, showing up with warships is going to look like an act of aggression, no matter what we intended. I agree, Voss said. But the council has made its decision. All we can do now is prepare and hope the human fleet listens to reason before anything happens. Over the next 2 days, the Halvan Rest continued its research on the Sentinel fleet, sending small teams to study several more of the ships. Each one told the same story, a fleet built to watch and record, not to attack, waiting patiently for a very long time, with no visitors until now. The soft blue lights across the formation remained steady, calm, almost peaceful, a strange contrast to the growing tension aboard the Charnaki ships. During those 2 days, the science team also returned to the question of the living presence detected during their very first scan, weeks earlier. A small team was sent back to the same fighter-sized ship, this time with more sensitive instruments. What they found surprised everyone. The faint biological reading had not come from a living crew member at all, but from a small chamber near the ship's core, containing preserved biological samples, seeds, and cell cultures, kept safely in stasis. It looks like a kind of seed vault, the science officer reported to Voss. Not a person, Captain, but something almost as precious to them, I would guess. A reminder that even out here, in a fleet built for war, they thought to protect something meant for growing, not fighting. Voss found the discovery oddly comforting. A fleet built with such care for even its smallest details, holding on to seeds of life alongside its weapons, told him something important about the people who had built it. During those same 2 days, Voss found himself thinking often about the message signed by Fleet Commander Ayana Reyes, the personal note left behind among the Sentinel fleet's cold technical records. He mentioned it during a private conversation with Iber one evening, the 2 of them sharing a quiet meal in the officers' mess, while most of the crew slept. Do you think she's still alive somewhere? Voss asked. Whoever wrote that message. Iber shook his head slowly. 11,000 years, Captain. Even accounting for advances in medicine we cannot imagine, it seems unlikely. But perhaps her words live on in some way, passed down through their history the way our own old sayings are passed down to us. I hope someone remembers her, Voss said quietly. It takes a certain kind of person to write something like that, thinking of strangers who might not arrive for thousands of years. Eber said nothing for a moment, simply nodding in quiet agreement, and the two of them finished their meal in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the strange, patient fleet waiting just outside the ship's hull. On the third day, the third fleet arrived. 3 Charnaki warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the silent reach, their gray hulls sharp against the darkness. Voss watched from the bridge of the Halvan Rest as the warships took up position near his own vessel, their weapon systems powering on for standard readiness checks. "Captain Ren Ashar of the Third Fleet is hailing us," Talus reported. "Put him through," Voss said. The screen showed a stern-faced Charnaki officer, his uniform crisp and formal. "Captain Terral," Ren said, "we've been briefed on the situation. My orders are to protect the Halvan Rest and secure the area until further instructions arrive from the Council. Captain Ren, I recommend keeping your weapons on standby only," Voss said. "We do not want to appear hostile when the human fleet arrives. This Sentinel fleet has shown no aggression toward us. I believe the same courtesy should be extended in return." Ren's expression did not change. "I understand your position, Captain, but my orders come from the Council, and my duty is to follow them. We will maintain a defensive posture, but we will be ready to respond if necessary." Voss studied the other captain's face for a moment, recognizing the familiar rigidity of a career officer who had spent his life following clear chains of command. It was not a bad quality in most circumstances, but Voss worried it might prove dangerous here, where the situation called for patience rather than procedure. "Captain Ren," Voss tried again, keeping his voice level. "I've spent weeks studying this fleet. Every piece of evidence we've gathered suggests restraint, not aggression, from its builders. A defensive posture on our part could easily be read as a threat by systems designed to detect exactly that kind of behavior." "Noted, Captain Terrell," Ren said, his tone polite but unmoved. "I will take your observations into consideration. But my ships will be ready." The conversation ended there, and Voss returned to his own bridge with a heavy feeling in his chest, the sense that events were slipping slightly out of his control, guided now by caution and procedure, rather than the careful understanding he had hoped to build. Voss did not like it, but there was little more he could do. The warships settled into position, their sensors scanning the Sentinel fleet, their weapons ready but not active. For a full day, nothing happened. The two fleets, one ancient and silent, the other new and cautious, simply sat facing each other in the dark. Then, on the following morning, the Sentinel fleet moved for the first time. "Captain, I'm reading movement," Talus said suddenly, her voice sharp with alarm. "Several Sentinel ships are repositioning." Voss hurried to the sensor station. On the screen, a group of about 20 Sentinel ships had shifted position, forming a loose line between the Charnaki warships and the rest of the sleeping fleet. "Are they preparing to attack?" Voss asked. "I don't think so," Talus said, studying the readings. "Their weapon systems are not charging. It looks more like they're placing themselves between us and the main fleet, like a barrier." Voss frowned, trying to understand the meaning behind the movement. Before he could decide what to do, Ren's voice came through on the communication channel, tense and urgent. "Captain Terrell, my sensors show unknown ships repositioning near your vessel. Standard defense protocol requires me to raise shields and prepare weapons." "Captain Ren, wait," Voss said quickly. "This could simply be a defensive posture on their part, not an attack. Give it time before—" "I will not risk my ships or the research vessel," Ren interrupted. "Raising shields now." Across the 3 warships, defensive shields shimmered into visibility, a clear and obvious military action. Voss watched in growing dread as the Sentinel fleet responded almost instantly. More ships shifted position, the line between the two fleets growing thicker. More ships joining the formation, their soft blue lights flickering slightly brighter. "They're reacting to us," Talus said. "Captain, I think they see the shields as a threat." "Get me Ren again," Voss said urgently. Before the connection could be made, one of the Sentinel ships fired. It was not a large attack, just a single beam of energy, precise and controlled, striking the forward shield of the nearest Charnaki warship. The shield absorbed the hit easily, but the message was clear. "They fired on us," Ren's voice came through, sharp with alarm. "Returning fire." "No, wait," Voss shouted, but it was too late. The Charnaki warship fired back, a full volley of energy weapons aimed at the Sentinel ship that had struck them. What happened next left everyone on the Halvan Rest speechless. The Sentinel ship's own shields activated instantly, absorbing the entire volley without so much as a flicker of damage. Then, in a display of speed and precision the Charnaki had never seen before, 5 more Sentinel ships moved to surround the attacking warship, not firing, simply positioning themselves in a perfect defensive formation around it, cutting off any escape route. "Captain, they've boxed in the Renar," Talus reported, her voice shaking. "They're not firing anymore. They're just holding position." "A warning," Voss said quietly, watching the screen. "They could have destroyed that ship in seconds if they wanted to. They're showing restraint." Ren's voice came through again, quieter now, the earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. "Captain Terrell, my ship is surrounded. Weapons are useless against their shields. What do I do?" Voss took a deep breath, thinking fast. "Power down your weapons and shields immediately. Show them you mean no harm. It's the only chance we have." There was a long pause. Then Ren's voice came back, tight but resolved. "Powering down." On the screen, the Renar's shields flickered and faded. A tense silence followed. Then, slowly, the surrounding Sentinel ships began to pull back, returning to their original positions, their weapons never having fired a second time. Voss let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Everyone stand down. No more weapons, no more shields. We need to show them we are not a threat before this gets any worse." As the Charnaki ships powered down their defenses, a new message came through, on the same frequency the Sentinel fleet had used before. This time, the translation device aboard the Halvan Rest was ready, and the words appeared almost instantly on the main screen. "Hostile action detected. Warning issued. Further aggression will result in full response. The human fleet has been notified. Estimated arrival, less than 1 day." Voss stared at the message, a cold feeling settling over him. They had come to study an ancient, silent fleet, and in doing so, had nearly started a conflict with a species that had shown almost unimaginable restraint, even after being fired upon. Now, less than a day remained before the true owners of this fleet arrived, and Voss had no idea what to expect when they did. The next 20 hours passed slower than any Voss Terrell had ever known. Sleep did not come easily to anyone aboard the Halvan Rest that night. Even in the crew quarters, where officers were supposed to rest between shifts, most simply lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the ship's systems, and wondering what the morning would bring. Aboard the Halvan Rest, every officer worked in near silence, watching sensors, checking logs, and waiting for the moment the true human fleet would arrive. The 3 Charnaki warships remained powered down, drifting quietly near the Sentinel formation, their captains under strict orders from Voss to take no action unless directly attacked. Counselor Marin had been informed of the incident, and was, understandably, furious that the situation had nearly turned into open conflict. He sent a sharp message to both Voss and Captain Ren, reminding them, in no uncertain terms, that any further weapon discharge, without direct council authorization, would result in serious consequences once the ships returned home. But anger did not change the situation they now faced. There was little the council could do now except wait, along with everyone else, to see what kind of response their actions had triggered. Voss used the waiting hours as best he could, gathering his senior officers for a final review of everything they knew, determined not to be caught unprepared a second time. He walked through every scrap of translated data from the Sentinel ship, every combat record, every note about human history and behavior, trying to build the clearest possible picture of who, or what, was about to arrive. "If their main fleet responds the way the Sentinel ships did," Iber offered during the review, "then restraint seems to be a core part of their doctrine, not just an accident of this one encounter. That should work in our favor, provided we do nothing further to provoke them." "And if it doesn't work in our favor?" Talus asked quietly. No one had a good answer to that question, and the room fell into an uneasy silence that lasted long after the meeting ended. "Talk to me," Voss said to Talus, standing beside the main sensor station. "Any sign of the approaching fleet?" "Not yet, Captain," Talus said. "Long-range sensors show nothing beyond the Sentinel formation. If they're coming, they're still too far away to detect." Iber joined them, looking tired from days of non-stop translation work. "I've gone through as much of the Sentinel fleet's records as I could access," he said. "I think it's worth understanding what we're truly dealing with before they arrive." "Go on," Voss said. The long wars I mentioned before were fought against multiple enemies at once, Iber explained. Some records suggest the humans faced threats that nearly wiped them out entirely, more than once. But every time, they recovered, rebuilt, and came back stronger. There's a phrase that appears again and again in their old records, something like a saying passed down through generations. Roughly translated, it means, we do not break, we adapt. Voss considered this. A species that had faced near destruction multiple times, and always returned stronger, was not a species to take lightly. There's something else, Iber added, hesitating slightly. The Sentinel fleet we found, all 1,200 plus ships, this was not built as their main defense. It was built as a boundary marker, a minor outpost, compared to what the records describe as their true fleet strength. The room went quiet. You're saying this entire fleet, larger than our whole navy, is considered minor to them? Tallis asked, her voice edged with disbelief. That's what the records suggest, Iber said. I don't know if it's still accurate today. These records are over 1,000 years old themselves. Separate from the fleet's original construction, humanity may have grown even larger since then, or they may have declined. We simply don't know. Voss rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They had come looking for answers about an ancient fleet, and instead had stumbled into contact with a species whose true power remained a mystery, a species who might be arriving any moment now to see what had disturbed their long silent guardians. Captain, Tallis suddenly called out. I'm reading something. Multiple contacts, forming at the far edge of our sensor range. Voss moved quickly to her station. On the screen, a series of new dots appeared, growing in number every few seconds. Unlike the Sentinel fleet, these ships were moving, approaching fast, their formation tight and organized. How many? Voss asked. Still counting, Captain, but it's already more than the Sentinel fleet. I'm reading 2,000 contacts, and rising. 3,000. Captain, this fleet is enormous. The bridge fell into stunned silence as the numbers kept climbing. 4,000. 5,000. By the time the count stabilized, the sensors reported over 6,000 ships, approaching in a formation so precise, it looked almost like a living wall of metal moving through space. Get Captain Wren on the line, Voss said, his voice steady, despite the fear building in his chest. All ships, weapons and shields remain powered down. No exceptions. I don't care what happens, no one fires first. The message went out to all 3 Charnaki warships. On the bridge of the Halvan Rest, every officer watched the screen in silence as the massive human fleet closed the distance, moving with a speed that seemed impossible for ships of such size. Within minutes, the fleet arrived, spreading out around the Sentinel formation and the Charnaki ships in a wide, encircling pattern. Voss watched as the Sentinel ships, silent for so long, suddenly moved in unison, aligning themselves with the new arrivals, joining the greater formation like pieces finally reunited. A single ship broke away from the main fleet, larger than the others, moving directly toward the Halvan Rest. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of Voss's own vessel, its hull marked with the same strange symbols they had seen on the Sentinel ships, though these looked newer, more refined. Incoming transmission, Tallis said, her voice tight. Put it through, Voss said, standing straighter, trying to project calm he did not entirely feel. The screen flickered, and an image appeared. A being stood on the other end, tall but not overly so, with pale skin and dark hair, wearing a simple gray uniform with no obvious decoration or rank markings that Voss could recognize. The face was calm, neither angry nor afraid, simply watchful, studying the image of Voss on their own screen with quiet attention. The translation device aboard the Halvan Rest worked quickly, having gathered enough data from the Sentinel fleet's records to form a rough understanding of the human language. Words began to appear as the human spoke. I am Fleet Admiral Renata Cho, of the United Human Fleet, the words translated. You are trespassing in protected space. We have reviewed the Sentinel records of your actions here, including the weapon discharge against one of our automated ships. Voss felt his stomach tighten. Admiral Cho, I am Captain Voss Terrell, of the Charnaki Dominion. I take full responsibility for the actions of my fleet. The weapon discharge was a mistake, born from fear and misunderstanding, not intended aggression. We came here only to study your Sentinel fleet. After discovering it during a mapping mission, we meant no harm. Admiral Cho studied him for a long moment before responding. Your Sentinel records support this account. The automated defense system showed restraint, consistent with standard first contact protocols. No lasting harm was done. However, this incident highlights a gap in your knowledge of our territory and our expectations for those who enter it. We are willing to listen and learn, Voss said carefully. Our council did not intend to threaten your people. If we caused offense, I offer a sincere apology on behalf of the Charnaki Dominion. For a moment, the Admiral's expression softened slightly. Apology accepted, Captain Tiral. It is rare for a first contact to end without greater conflict. Your restraint after the incident, ordering your ships to power down, likely prevented further escalation. That decision reflects well on you and your people. Voss allowed himself a small breath of relief, though the tension in the room remained high. Every officer on the bridge watched the exchange closely, aware that the fate of relations between their two species might well depend on the next few minutes. May I ask, Admiral, Voss said, why this fleet is stationed here? Our records show similar species avoid the Silent Reach, believing it empty. We had no knowledge that this space belonged to anyone. This region marks the outer boundary of human-protected territory, Admiral Cho explained. It was established after the Long Wars, over 11,000 of your years ago, to prevent future conflicts by clearly marking where caution should be exercised. The Sentinel fleet you encountered is a small portion of our border defense network. Its purpose is observation and warning, not conquest. We prefer peaceful resolution whenever possible, though we remain prepared for conflict if it becomes necessary. Voss thought carefully before his next question. Admiral, if I may ask, why does a boundary marker require a fleet of over 1,000 ships? Among my people, such numbers would represent the majority of our military strength. A faint, almost sad smile crossed the Admiral's face. Captain Terrell, I understand your question, and I do not ask it to boast, but simply to answer honestly, as I hope will help you understand us better. The Sentinel network across our entire border consists of many such formations, spread across a vast distance. What you found is only one small piece of a much larger system. We built it this way not because we seek conflict, but because we learned, through great loss during the Long Wars, that peace is best protected by strength that need never be used. The bridge fell silent as the weight of those words settled over everyone present. Voss glanced at Iber, who looked equally stunned by the calm, matter-of-fact way the Admiral spoke about numbers that dwarfed the entire Charnaki military. Talus leaned toward Voss and whispered, Captain, if this is only one border formation among many, what does that say about the rest of their territory? Voss did not answer. He did not need to. The thought had already crossed his mind, and he suspected it had crossed the mind of every officer standing on the bridge. If a single boundary marker held over 6,000 ships, the true size of human civilization was almost too large to imagine. And yet, the Admiral spoke of it not with pride or threat, but with the same plain honesty a farmer might use to describe the size of a harvest. It was simply a fact of her world, nothing more. I understand, Admiral, Voss said finally. I will relay this information to my council, along with a full account of what we have learned here. I hope this can be the beginning of understanding between our species, rather than the cause of conflict. That is my hope as well, Captain Terrell, Admiral Cho replied. Humanity does not seek war with those we have not yet met, but we will always be ready, should the need arise. I would ask that you and your ships withdraw from this region for now, while formal contact protocols are established between our governments. This is not a punishment, simply a matter of proper procedure. Understood, Admiral. We will withdraw immediately. The transmission ended, and the image of Admiral Cho faded from the screen. Voss stood quietly for a long moment, processing everything that had just happened. Around him, the bridge crew slowly returned to their duties, though the tension in the room had not fully disappeared. Captain, Talus said softly, the human fleet is holding position. They're not pursuing us. Set a course back toward Charnaki space, Voss ordered. Signal Captain Wren's warships to do the same. We're going home. As the Halvan Rest turned away from the massive gathering of human ships, Voss took one last look at the main screen. The Sentinel fleet and the newly arrived battle fleet sat together now, thousands of ships strong, glowing softly in the darkness of the Silent Reach. patient and watchful as they had always been. It was, Voss thought, both the most beautiful and the most unsettling sight he had ever witnessed. He thought of Admiral Cho's words, spoken so calmly, about strength built not for conquest, but so that it would never need to be used. He wondered what kind of history could shape a species into building such a thing, and what kind of future awaited the Charnaki people, now that they had, quite by accident, opened a door that could never again be fully closed. As the ship carried them back toward familiar space, Voss began preparing his full report for the Council, knowing that the coming days would bring difficult decisions, delicate negotiations, and a great deal of careful thought about what it truly meant to share the galaxy with a species like humanity. He worked through the night, drafting and redrafting his account of the encounter, careful to include not just the tense moments and the overwhelming size of the human fleet, but also the quiet respect Admiral Cho had shown, and the restraint the Sentinel ships had displayed even after being fired upon. He wanted the Council to understand the full picture, not just the parts that might frighten them into a hasty decision. Iber joined him partway through the night, bringing with him the translated files copied from the Sentinel ship days earlier. "I think these should be attached to your report as well," Iber said, setting the files down beside Voss's console. "The Council needs to see the message from Commander Reyes. It says more about who these people are than any account of their fleet size ever could." Voss agreed, and by the time the Halvan Rest crossed back into familiar Charnaki space, his report was complete, a careful and honest account, meant not to alarm, but to inform, a foundation upon which two very different civilizations might begin, cautiously and respectfully, to understand one another. 6 months passed after the encounter in the Silent Reach. In that time, Voss's report, along with the translated files from the Sentinel fleet, had been studied carefully by the entire Charnaki Council. Debate raged for weeks over how to proceed. Some council members, fearful of a species with such overwhelming military strength, argued for cutting off contact entirely and avoiding the region altogether. Others, intrigued by the calm and thoughtful way Admiral Cho had handled the incident, argued that this was a rare chance to build a relationship with a civilization that valued restraint as much as strength. In the end, it was Councillor Marin, once among the most cautious voices on the council, who spoke the deciding words during the final debate. "We were given a choice out there in the dark," he said, addressing the full council. "We chose to power down our weapons instead of escalating further. The humans, in turn, chose restraint over destruction, even after we fired first. If two peoples can find that kind of understanding in a moment of fear and confusion, imagine what might be possible if we approach them instead with patience and open intention." The council voted, narrowly but decisively, in favor of formal contact. In that time, the galaxy changed in ways few could have predicted. The report Voss Terrell submitted to the Charnaki High Council spread quickly through diplomatic channels, and soon every major species with knowledge of interstellar travel had heard the story of the sleeping fleet that woke, and the far larger fleet that came in answer. Formal contact between the Charnaki Dominion and the United Human Fleet had been established within weeks. Careful, cautious meetings took place, first through recorded messages, then through small diplomatic missions, each side testing the intentions of the other. Voss, having been the one to make first contact, was asked to lead the Charnaki diplomatic team, a duty he accepted with a mixture of pride and nervousness. The first true meeting between representatives of both species took place aboard a neutral station built specifically for the occasion, floating in a quiet system between Charnaki and human territory. Voss stood in the station's main hall, waiting alongside Councillor Marin and a small group of advisors, watching as the human delegation's shuttle approached through the station's large viewing window. "Nervous?" Marin asked quietly. "More than I'd like to admit," Voss replied. The shuttle docked smoothly, and a few moments later, the doors opened. Admiral Renata Cho walked through first, dressed in a formal version of the same simple gray uniform Voss remembered from their first meeting. Behind her came several other humans, some in similar uniforms, others in civilian clothing, representing different parts of what Voss now understood was a vast and varied human civilization. "Captain Terrell," Admiral Cho said, extending a hand in a gesture Voss had learned was a common human greeting. "It's good to see you again, under better circumstances." Voss took her hand carefully, mimicking the gesture as he had practiced. "Admiral Cho, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Introductions were exchanged carefully, each side offering names, titles, and small gestures of respect learned from weeks of preparation. Voss noticed that several of the human representatives had clearly studied Charnaki customs, offering the traditional slow bow used among his people when meeting someone of importance for the first time. It was a small thing, but it eased some of the tension in the room, a sign that this meeting had been prepared for with genuine care, rather than treated as a mere formality. Over the following hours, formal introductions were made, and the two delegations settled into a long series of discussions. Voss listened closely as human representatives explained more about their civilization, a vast collection of worlds and colonies stretching across a region of space larger than anything the Charnaki had previously mapped. They learned that the Long Wars, which had shaped so much of human military doctrine, had ended, not through complete victory, but through hard-won peace, achieved only after enormous sacrifice on all sides. "We do not tell you this to frighten you," one of the human representatives explained during a break in formal talks, a historian named Dr. Eris Kell. "We tell you because understanding our past helps explain our present. Humanity values peace deeply, precisely because we understand the cost of losing it." Voss found himself both humbled and reassured by these words. The humans he met were not the terrifying, all-powerful conquerors that fear might have painted them as after the discovery of their massive fleet. They were thoughtful, careful, and, in many ways, remarkably similar to his own people, in their hopes for a peaceful future among the stars. As trust slowly grew between the two delegations, Admiral Cho invited Voss and a small group of Charnaki representatives to visit one of the outer human colonies, a chance to see human civilization firsthand, rather than through reports and translated records. Voss accepted immediately. The journey to the colony took several days aboard a human transport ship, a vessel far more comfortable than Voss had expected, with quiet lounges, wide viewing windows, and crew members who greeted their Charnaki guests with easy, genuine friendliness, rather than the stiff formality Voss had grown used to during the diplomatic talks. He found himself relaxing more with each passing hour, the tension of the past months slowly beginning to ease. The colony, a large space station orbiting a quiet blue planet, was unlike anything Voss had expected. Instead of the cold, purely military atmosphere he had imagined, he found bustling markets, schools full of children, parks with real growing plants brought carefully from Earth and other human worlds, and streets filled with ordinary people going about ordinary lives. It was, in many ways, remarkably similar to a Charnaki colony, full of laughter, work, disagreement, and community. "This is not what I expected," Voss admitted to Admiral Cho as they walked together through one of the station's public gardens. "What did you expect?" she asked, a small smile on her face. "After seeing your fleet, I suppose I expected something more severe," Voss said honestly. "A society built entirely around strength and readiness for war." Admiral Cho considered this for a moment before answering. "We are prepared for conflict because history has taught us that unpreparedness leads to greater suffering. But preparation for war is not the same as desire for it. Most humans you will ever meet have never fired a weapon in anger, and hope never to. The fleet exists so that people like the ones you see here, in this garden, can live their lives without fear." Voss nodded slowly, understanding beginning to settle over him in a way that reports and records could never have provided. "Among my people, there is a saying, 'Strength shown quietly is strength trusted.' I think perhaps humanity understands this better than most." Later that afternoon, Voss was introduced to a group of local school children visiting the garden on a class trip. Their teacher, a young woman with a warm smile, explained to them that Voss was a visitor from a species called the Charnaki, one of the first outsiders many of the children had ever seen in person. The children, far from being afraid, crowded around him with excited questions, asking about his homeworld, his ship, and whether Charnaki children played the same kinds of games human children did. Voss found himself laughing for the first time in months, answering their questions as best he could through his translation device, charmed by their open curiosity. It struck him, watching their bright, unafraid faces, that this was perhaps the truest measure of the peace his mission had helped build, not the treaties signed by councils and admirals, but the simple fact that human children could stand comfortably beside a Charnaki stranger and see nothing to fear. Admiral Cho laughed softly. "That's a fine saying, Captain Terral. I'll remember it. As the days passed, the visit continued, filled with exchanges of knowledge, culture, and careful diplomacy. Voss learned about human history beyond the long wars, about art, music, and stories passed down through generations. He shared stories of his own, of Charnaki history, struggles and hopes, finding unexpected common ground in the simple, universal desire for peace, growth, and understanding between different peoples. Near the end of the visit, Voss stood once more with Admiral Cho, this time looking out over the same blue planet from a large viewing deck on the station. "I have a question, Admiral, if you don't mind," Voss said. "Go ahead." "The Sentinel fleet, the one my ship first discovered. Why keep such an old system in place for so long, watching an empty region of space for over 11,000 years, if no one ever came?" Admiral Cho was quiet for a moment, watching the slow turn of the planet below. "Because someone always eventually comes, Captain Terral. Maybe not for 1,000 years, maybe not for 10,000. But space is vast, and time is patient. We built that fleet not expecting quick results, but understanding that eventually, someone would find it, and when they did, we wanted to be ready to meet them with caution, but also with the chance for peace, rather than simply reacting in fear or aggression." Voss thought about this for a long moment, remembering the calm voice recorded in that first message, the soft blue lights waking after so many silent years, the careful restraint shown even after being fired upon in fear. "It seems your patience was rewarded," Voss said finally. "I believe it was," Admiral Cho agreed. "Though I suspect this is only the beginning of a much longer story between our peoples, Captain. There is still much to learn, on both sides." As the negotiations concluded, and formal diplomatic relations were established between the Charnaki Dominion and the United Human Fleet, word of the peaceful outcome spread throughout known space. Other species, some who had long avoided contact with either the Charnaki or the mysterious human civilization, began to take notice, curious about what kind of future might be built from such a careful and thoughtful beginning. Voss returned to Charnaki space some weeks later, carrying with him not just official reports and treaties, but a deeper understanding of a species once thought to be nothing more than old legend and half-forgotten warning. He often thought back to that first moment, standing on the bridge of the Valoon Drift, watching 1,000 silent ships light up in the darkness, every sensor turned toward his small scout ship. He understood now that those lights had never been a threat. They had been an invitation, patient and quiet, waiting 11,000 years for someone brave enough, or perhaps simply curious enough, to answer. In the years that followed, trade routes opened between Charnaki and human space. Scientists from both civilizations worked together on shared projects, blending different approaches to technology and discovery in ways neither species could have achieved alone. Cultural exchanges brought human music and stories into Charnaki homes, while Charnaki art and philosophy found new audiences among curious human colonists. The Sentinel fleet remained in place at the edge of the Silent Reach, its ancient ships still standing guard, still watching, still ready should any future traveler stumble upon them as Voss once had. But now, alongside the old warning message, a new signal had been added, one crafted jointly by human and Charnaki engineers, offering not just caution to newcomers, but a welcome and the promise of peaceful contact for those willing to approach with open hands. Voss Terral, in his later years, often told the story of that first discovery to young Charnaki pilots, training for exploration missions of their own. He would remind them that the galaxy was full of unknowns, some frightening, some wonderful, and that the difference between conflict and friendship often rested on nothing more than a moment of careful choice, a decision to listen rather than fear, to understand rather than assume. And somewhere far beyond the edge of the galaxy, in the quiet darkness of the Silent Reach, the great fleet continued its silent watch, thousands of ships strong, patient as ever, waiting for the next traveler who might dare to come close enough to answer the question it had been asking for so very long: who are you, and do you come in peace? That question, first asked in silence 11,000 years ago, had finally been answered, and in the answering, two great civilizations had found not an enemy to fear, but a friend worth knowing, proof that even across the vast and lonely distances of space, understanding was always possible, for those brave enough to reach out and try. Years later, when Voss finally retired from active service, He chose to spend his final working years teaching at a training academy for young Charnaki explorers. On the wall of his small office, he kept a single framed image, a still picture taken from the Velen Drift's old sensor logs, showing the Sentinel fleet exactly as it had first appeared, dark and silent, its 1,000 ships waiting patiently in the endless black of the silent reach. Students who visited his office often asked about the picture, and Voss always gave the same answer, the same lesson he hoped they would carry with them into their own journeys among the stars. Out there, he would say, gesturing toward the framed image, you will find things that frighten you, things you do not understand, and things large enough to make you feel small. When that happens, remember this fleet. Remember that even something built for war can be an invitation to peace, if you are willing to look past your fear long enough to ask the right questions. And with that, he would send them off to their own ships, to their own discoveries, carrying with them the same lesson 1,000 ancient, silent ships had taught him, so many years before, in the quiet dark beyond the edge of the galaxy.